All right, welcome back. Hope you're all having a great week. Today we're continuing our RBT exam practice question series with our next set of questions that we will break down together. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. If you're looking for our proven study materials, please check out btexamreview.com. We offer 3 practice exams, a task list study guide, and of course our famous combo pack. We also have a YouTube membership now that you can join if you'd like to support us further. Questions, comments, please let us know. Let us know when you pass your exam. Other than that, work hard, study hard. Let's get to our questions. Question 1. I hold out my hand to stretch my arm. Later, I hold out my hand and tell someone to stop. These behaviors have the same what? Remember, when we're describing behaviors, we're talking about functions, why it happens, topography, what it looks like, and then sometimes magnitude. What is the intensity of it? So in this case, we're holding out our hand, or I'm holding out my hand to stretch my arm. But then I hold out my hand to tell someone to stop. So the behaviors look exactly the same, but am I doing the behavior to serve the same purpose? Am I getting the same thing out of the behavior each time I do it? Well, no. The first time, I just hold my hand out, I'm stretching my arm. Later, I hold my hand out and tell someone to stop. So even though the behaviors look the same, they function completely differently. So if we were to say these behaviors have the same blank, we would say they have the same A, topography. Yes, topography is what the behavior looks like. Holding out my hand looks identical. It has the same topography. It just doesn't have the same B function. They're not serving the same purpose. And then C, magnitude, we don't know the intensity of this, right? We don't know if I had it out there a long time, a short time, if I did it hard, if I did it soft. We don't have magnitude. So we know the topography is the same. We know the function is not the same, and we don't know the magnitude. All we can say about these behaviors is that they have the same topography. Your BCBA develops an intervention using a DRA procedure. They ask you to take data to determine how often the client engages in the target behavior, but not to implement DRA yet. What kind of data are you taking? All right, harder question. I'd say maybe a 7 or 8. And it requires you to think a little bit, right? So we have our intervention, okay, and we're looking at the kind of data we're taking on our intervention. And typically, as an RBT, you're going to take 2 types of data, right? You're going to take baseline data, and then you're going to take data during the intervention, and then sometimes you'll take data after if we're taking maintenance data. So really 3 types. So in this case, we have our intervention, going to be a DRA, a differential reinforcement procedure. But your BCBA tells you to take data to determine how often the client engages in the target behavior, but not to implement the DRA yet. So basically, they're saying take data, but don't implement an intervention. So what are you doing here? Remember, when we take data before implementing an intervention, we're trying to determine where that target behavior is starting. In other words, we're looking for a baseline. This is what we mean by baseline. Where does our target behavior begin? Because once we start the intervention, we want to see the change. We want to see if the intervention is causing any kind of change. So what kind of data are you taking? A, indirect data. Well, indirect data would not be on the client. Right? You'd be taking data on something else away from the client. You're directly taking data on the client. You're just taking it before intervention. B, preference data. Are we taking any sort of preference assessment data here? No, we're talking about intervention and pre-intervention. So C, baseline data, all right, we're looking at data prior to intervention, and data prior to intervention is going to be baseline. So your BCBA wants you to take baseline data. And then, of course, maintenance data is almost the opposite of baseline. Baseline comes before intervention. Maintenance is after intervention stops. We want to see if the skill still maintains. So, tricky question, again, but if you understand what it's asking you to do, you can figure it out, right? We want data before intervention starts. We need a baseline, so they are asking you to take baseline data. Blaine has limited language and limited attending skills. Whenever he sits with his peers in a group, his RBT will sit 3 or 4 feet behind him. Every 30 seconds, Blaine will fall backwards, forcing the RBT to catch him and sit him back upright. If the RBT praises Blaine before 30 seconds, Blaine will not fall backwards. The most likely function of this behavior is what? All right, hypothesizing functions. When you hypothesize function, you have to use all the information they give you to really narrow in on why you think that behavior is occurring. So our 4 functions are what? tangible, trying to gain an item; attention, trying to gain attention; escape, trying to get away from something; and then automatic sensory, it's happening alone. In this case, we have a client. He sits with his peers in a group. RBT is 3 or 4 feet behind him, but every 30 seconds, the client will fall back and force the RBT to catch him, sit him back upright. Okay. Doesn't tell us a whole lot, right? It could be escape. Maybe he's trying to escape from the group. It could be attention. Those are our two best guesses so far. It doesn't look like any items are involved, and there's a second party, so it's not automatic. But if the RBT praises Blaine before 30 seconds, Blaine will not fall backwards. Meaning, if Blaine gets attention for 30 seconds, he won't engage in the behavior. So what does that tell you about the behavior? That it's most likely occurring to gain the attention of the RBT. Because if we are using what would essentially be a non-contingent reinforcement procedure, we're giving the attention before he can fall backwards. All Blaine wants is attention, and the way he gains it is by falling backwards every 30 seconds. We know it's for attention because if we praise or give attention before that, he won't do it. So most likely the function of the behavior is attention. That's how we have to walk through these behavior questions, these function questions, right? Tangible, there's no item involved. Automatic, there's a second party involved. Escape might have been likely, but that second part really pushes it towards attention, right? Because when we give him attention, the behavior no longer occurs. A 3-year-old has just learned how to ask why questions. Now, the 3-year-old is asking why questions nonstop to his mom and dad. Finally, the parents tell the 3-year-old that they must wait until a timer beeps before they can ask another question. The parents are increasing what measurement of behavior? Okay, 3-year-old learn to talk. All they want to know, why? Over and over, right? Constant why questions. So the parents develop this intervention. They're telling the 3-year-old that they must wait until a timer beeps before they can ask another question. So what is the question asking? Well, the question is asking us about the measurement, what measurement they're using, and what are they trying to increase? So think about it for a second, right? They're wanting to increase something, but if they make the 3-year-old wait before asking more questions, what are they decreasing? Well, they'd be decreasing the frequency of behavior, right? Because what they're trying to do is less questions, okay? So in order to do that, they've got to increase something. Are they increasing duration? Well, no, they're not increasing the duration necessarily of the questions, right? Now, you could say, well, they're increasing the time in between questions, and you'd be right. But is that duration if we're going time in between responses, or is that into response time? Well, that's going to be into response time. So you got to be very careful when you're dealing with things like duration and into response time because they both deal with the set amount of time. But duration is for a one discrete behavior, right? In this case, we're not necessarily looking at the question as the behavior. We're looking for the time in between those questions. What the parents are attempting to do is increase the time in between this 3-year-old asking why questions. They're trying to increase the inter-response time. They're not looking at latency because latency is from the SD to the first response. In this case, we're looking from response to response to response to response and trying to increase the time in between each of those responses. And of course, like we said, frequency, we're not trying to increase frequency, we're trying to decrease frequency. So the parents are increasing what measurement of behavior into response time. Tricky question. If you got it right, good for you. If not, that's fine. Review it, go back to your continuous measurements, really understand why is it IRT and not duration? Why is it IRT and not frequency? If you can start asking yourself those questions during practice, you're going to get a lot better at the exam and be much more successful on test day. The proper way to implement a least to most prompting procedure is what? Just put out our prompting video. Make sure you check that out. 2 major ways RBTs implement prompts: least to most to least. Most effective way at fading prompts and introducing prompts. So we want the proper way to implement a least to most prompting procedure. Now, let's define least to most prompting procedure. Whenever we see a term, we try to define it. Least to most prompting procedure says we're going to use the least intrusive prompt possible until we can't anymore, and then we have to slowly increase the intrusiveness. Okay? How do we properly implement that strategy? A, after assessment, provide only necessary physical prompts until the learner is able to complete the skill independently. If we were using least to most prompting, would we ever go straight from assessment to physical prompts? No, physical prompts are the most intrusive. Okay, that would be the reverse of what we're trying to achieve. B, after assessment, provide a verbal prompt and then increase the prompt as necessary. All right, we are closer, okay, because verbal prompt is not very intrusive at all. It is one of our least prompts, okay, if we're looking least to most. However, there is a better way and a more proper way to implement this procedure. C, after assessment, let the learner attempt the skill without prompt. If necessary, introduce the least intrusive prompt possible. Here we go. C is better than B. Why? Because C, you give the learner an opportunity to attempt the skill without the prompt, which is ultimately what we want to achieve anyway. With B, you're never giving them a chance to try without prompting, which is incorrect. We have to give them a try, at least an attempt, at least to most prompting, to try the skill without a prompt. Then, if necessary, if they can't complete the skill, we slowly introduce a the least intrusive prompt possible, right? And then D, after assessment, model the behavior until the learner imitates. Modeling is up there with a very intrusive prompt. You wouldn't start there with least to most. And again, we want to give the learner the ability or the opportunity to demonstrate, can you do the skill without the prompt? Because if you can, then we don't need to use prompting. Least to most, the least level of prompting is no prompting at all, right? Think about it that way. Least level of prompting is no prompting at all. Start there, slowly increase. A child is bouncing in her walker. Her mom does not look at her until she says, "Mama." Then the mom smiles at her and says, "Great talking." Mom is using what type of teaching? All right. Mom is teaching her child to call for her, to speak, say "mama," and she's using these opportunities given to her kind of naturally, right? She's not at a table running flashcards and running drills and sitting there going back and forth with SDs and consequences. She's just casually going about her day as the child bounces in her walker. But as soon as the child says "mama," mom smiles and reinforces. So if she's using these natural opportunities, what type of teaching is she using? She's not using discrete trial. Discrete trial has a clear beginning and end, right? Where it's rapid, there's a lot of feedback involved, a lot of trials running. The child might go minutes or longer before saying "mama" again, and that's fine. Mom isn't rushing it. She's not in a discrete trial mode where she's rapidly engaging SDs and consequences. What she's doing is she's incidentally teaching. She's using these incidents of the child saying "mama" to teach, right, and to reinforce. Remember, naturalistic is the same as incidental. So if you look at B and C, the mom is using both of these type of teachings because they're the same thing. Naturalistic and incidental teaching are just the same thing said a different way. Naturally, we're just teaching her to say "mama." We're using the incident of her saying "mama" to reinforce. So the mom is using what type of teaching? Well, of course, both B and C. You're starving after having not eaten last night. You walk downstairs, grab some eggs out of the fridge, and start scrambling them in a pan. Once they are finished, you go to reach for a plate and spill your eggs all over the floor. Now you have to clean up the mess. What is the consequence of reaching for a plate? Kind of a different question here. I want to spend a little time thinking about breaking down behavior questions, because when you get questions on the exam that are asking for you to identify maybe the SD or the MO or the consequence, you're going to have to slow down and really start to break it down into ABCs, right? Antecedents, behaviors, and consequences, because there's a lot going on in this particular problem. So first, start with what the question is asking. The question is asking about the consequence of reaching for a plate. So let's zone in on reaching for a plate, right? So we are walking downstairs, we grab some eggs, start scrambling them. They're finished, then we reach for a plate. Okay, stop there. Reaching for a plate, what is the antecedent? Well, they're finished. We know right before you reach for a plate, the eggs are finished. Consequence is what occurs immediately after the behavior. You reach for your plate, spill your eggs. So our consequence in our ABC contingency, our antecedent behavior consequence contingency, is spilling eggs. So we've predicted our answer, and now we just have to find it. So what is the consequence of reaching for a plate? Hey, burning yourself. Well, we don't talk about burning ourselves at all in the question. And that's why it's so important to take your time on the question, because you want to understand and know exactly what information they've given you. If you read this question quickly, jump to the answer choices and try to figure it out, you're just going to be going back and forth. You're going to be wasting a lot of time. Do all your work up front, figure out up front what they're asking you, and try to predict the answer, then get into the answer choices. So B, spilling your eggs. Well, that's what we said, right? Your eggs are finished. You reach for a plate. You spilled your eggs. Consequence for reaching for a plate, spilling your eggs. C, cleaning up the floor. Well, you have to clean up the floor after spilling your eggs, right? That isn't the consequence for reaching for the plate. Consequence was spilling the eggs. Now, if you looked at spilling your eggs as a behavior, the consequence of that would be cleaning up the mess. See how this kind of works? It goes one into another. And then the eggs are finished. Well, the eggs are finished was the antecedent for reaching for a plate, and the consequence for reaching for a plate was spilling your eggs. Now, that can get very, very kind of monotonous going through it like that, but the more you do it, the better you get at it. And that's what practice is about, right? You have to just put in the work and the effort, even if it's monotonous, to go through those steps, because the more you do them, the better you get and the quicker you get. After a year of working at a company, your supervisor gives you permission to train a client's parents on the use of positive reinforcement. What should you avoid doing while training? Now, if you've been studying with me, hopefully you get this one very easily and very quickly. Okay. So finally, you've gotten permission to train a client's parents, which is very exciting, right? Whenever BCBAs can trust their RBTs to train basics, that's a huge step, right? It's something to strive for, essentially. But if you're going to train, what do you need to avoid doing? A, you should give observable and measurable examples. Should you avoid that? Of course not, right? You want to give observable and measurable examples, things the parents can relate to, things they can understand. Don't avoid A. A is what you should be trying to do. B, you should use technical language and jargon to prove you know what you're talking about. Now, as an RBT, there's sometimes this urge to have to prove yourself to parents. Okay. We understand that, right? You want to get off on the right foot. You want to be respected in your training, so you want to show you're an expert. However, we don't need to talk to stakeholders and parents and people who don't know ABA using ABA terminology, using technical terminology, using jargon, because they're not going to understand what you're talking about. What you need to do is speak in layman's terms. Speak in a language they can understand. Speak using words they get, okay? Good trainer can figure out a way to get their message across without using a bunch of jargon and technical language that you have to explain. So what are you going to avoid doing? Well, B. Now, what about D? You should forward any questions they have to your supervising BCBA. Yes, even though the supervisor gives you permission to train, you're still operating under the supervision of the supervisor, and you still need to forward questions you have or they have to the BCBA. So you want to do A, C, and D. What you want to avoid is B. You have to avoid using technical language and jargon just to prove you know what you're talking about. Which of the following is not an example of a response prompt? Remember, we have response prompts and stimulus prompts. Response prompts act directly on our responses. Stimulus prompts, of course, act directly on our stimuli. So a response prompt is going to be trying to evoke a direct response without manipulating the stimuli. So A, modeling. Well, if I'm modeling for you, I'm hoping you imitate my responses. Modeling is a great example of a response prompt. B, physical. If I'm physically prompting you, then I'm helping you do the response I want to see. Again, acting directly on the response. C, verbal. If I'm telling you what to do, okay, I'm again acting directly on your response. D, positional. With positional, I'm manipulating the stimuli, the antecedent stimuli. Maybe I move it closer to you. Maybe I move it further away from you. I'm doing something with the stimuli, making it a stimulus prompt. Which of the following is not an example of a response prompt? It's going to be D, positional. Awesome. Thank you for watching. Please check out btexamreview.com. Like and subscribe. Join. Questions, comments, let us know. As always, work hard, study hard. See you soon.